ahead and mute your. All right, we're already getting started. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mandy Seetaller, and I'm the current chair of the National Child Passenger Safety Board and the Alaska Child Passenger Safety Coordinator. It's my honor to serve as the MC for today's CPS Coordinators Forum. As a reminder, we'd love to know who is joining us today, so please type your name and location in the chat box. And we have some planned time at the end of the session today to answer questions, so please put those in the chat box. We'll keep track of that and make sure we have a few minutes to answer those at the end. As a reminder, attendees are requested to not participate in this forum if you are operating a motor vehicle. The presentation will be recorded, and you can listen to the recording when you safely arrive at your destination. So today's webinar will be timely and informative, except for those of you that are in the snow today. It's an informative presentation on pediatric vehicular heat stroke prevention, a very serious issue. The speakers joining us today share information on PVH science, non-traditional employee-based PVH resources, and examples of state PVH programming. Our first speaker today is Dr. David Diamond. Dr. Diamond has a PhD in neuroscience and is a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of South Florida. He's studied the brain and memory for over 40 years and has specifically studied children forgotten in cars for the past 2 decades. As we start today's webinar, this is a good reminder for us all in understanding how and why PVH happens as we are tasked with programming strategies in prevention in our states. Welcome, Dr. Diamond.
Thank you, Mandy. And I'd like to thank Jessica as well as Tammy for inviting me to present today. Let's see, I'm going to share, and be sure I share the right screen. Okay. And hopefully everyone is seeing my first slide. I haven't heard anything about problems, so I'm assuming you can now see my first slide. So I'm going to talk about my research as well as experiences with parents who have forgotten children in cars, and as a result, the children have died of heat stroke. And so what I'm going to talk about quite a few different topics, one of which is the response of the public, as well as the police officers, law enforcement who respond with a knee-jerk reaction to when children are forgotten in cars. I'll talk a bit about the neurobiology of memory. And so emphasize the type of memory that fails when children are forgotten in cars. And a bit about the perfect storm, I call it, of the events that actually result in children dying of heat stroke. You know, what are the different events that all come together? In fact, everything goes wrong to lead to a child being forgotten in a car and dying of heat stroke. And I'm going to talk about strategy. What is it that needs to be done so that children don't die in hot cars? And I'll tell you that I'm not an advocate for the look before you lock approach. So the first thing is there's a lot of hostility when you look at the general public's response to a parent that leaves a child in a car. This was actually a rather contentious interview I had with a newscaster who was stating that these parents who leave children in cars must have a psychiatric disorder. So they need to be treated. And the comments that you'll see, and this is a rather G-rated comment, in which people view any kind of parent or person who leaves a child in a car as an abusive person, a negligent parent. There must be something wrong with them. So this is what we have to deal with in thinking about how does the public respond to our program. This is a very sad, tragic example a few years ago in which I saw on TV a firefighter in Tampa that had forgotten his child. The child died as a result of heat stroke. And the sheriff that night immediately said that, I understand he didn't do this on purpose, but he is guilty of negligence. He's guilty of a crime. He's guilty of child abuse, aggravated manslaughter. And he says down here, the father could offer no explanation, and it just doesn't make any sense to him. And I was very pleased that I got involved in this case and I was able to get the charges against him dropped. But I think what we're looking at is the importance of educating the public. And I think it's important to educate law enforcement to understand how this can happen to anyone, and it's an unintentional act in which the person is unaware at the time they exit the car that the child is in the car. And so I addressed these issues in a paper I published a few years ago in a hybrid medical legal journal, which I not only covered the neurobiology of how it is possible to forget a child in a car, I covered the legal issues as well. And so the three main parts of the brain that I'll cover are frontal cortex, which allows you to plan for the future. The hippocampus, which is basically our explicit memory structure. It allows us to remember all the details that are occurring in our life. And the basal ganglia is a major player in this activity because it's the one that allows you to do things out of habit without thinking about it. And so when these structures work together and work well, it's a beautiful thing, and it allows us to multitask. And I think this is a nice example in which you have multiple cognitive, attentive, memory functioning going on all at the same time. So with these two athletes right there, they're looking at each other, they are strategizing. Should I go to the right? Should I go to the left? Am I far enough away? Am I close enough to the basket to shoot? And that's the frontal cortex that allows you to plan for the future. The hippocampus is our essential memory structure. It allows each player to keep track of the scores it's changing. How many timeouts are there? How much time is remaining? And it's the basal ganglia that now operates independent of those structures and allows us to do something automatically. It's like when someone's in the zone, we call it muscle memory, or being on autopilot, which is why this player doesn't need to look at the ball, doesn't need to think about how hard to push that ball to the floor to have it come up. And so these different structures are operating independently and allows us to multitask. And so again, about memory, when we talk about fact-based memory, that's called declarative memory. And so we can remember where we live, and the name of my dog, what I had for breakfast, and where I left my keys. So that's called declarative memory. And of course, we do forget these things. But there's a more important memory that's related to catastrophes, and that's called prospective memory. That means we want to remember to do something in the future. So we all have things going on. We have something going on when this webinar is over. So I need to remember what I'm going to do later. For example, I have a doctor's appointment today. I want to stop at the store on the way home. So I need to remember to stop my routine drive and pick up milk. So as I have here on the steering wheel, a reminder, because if I don't have that reminder, I'm potentially going to forget to stop at the store. So prospective memory is to remember to do something in the future. And here's an example that I actually saw. This happens all the time in which we have failures of prospective memory. What I saw was a woman who, I was sitting at the coffee shop looking out the window, and a woman put her cup on the roof of her car, and just in a moment she was distracted. And then as a result of being distracted, she lost awareness of the cup on her roof. She then got in her car and drove away. So this is how vulnerable prospective memory is in basically a benign situation. But prospective memory leads to catastrophe when that fails. And so there are so many different ways in which catastrophes can occur with a failure of prospective memory. So I have some visual examples here. People forget that their stove is on, which results in a kitchen fire. Airline pilots forget to set their flaps properly. Plane takes off and then crashes. Officers, police officers, and detectives for a moment are distracted and leave their loaded guns in public bathrooms. And of course, a child is forgotten in a car. All of these involve a failure of prospective memory, which then ultimately can be catastrophic. And I just want to elaborate a bit on the airline crash. So this happened in 1987, in which the airline pilots were going through their preparation to take off, and they were distracted just at the moment in which they're going to set their flaps properly. And this being decades ago, there was insufficient technology to be able to remind them to set the flaps properly, and that plane crashed. This doesn't happen anymore because now we have multiple technological programs and alarms that will make sure that the flaps are set properly. It just shows the importance of having technology to override the possibility of a catastrophic prospective memory failure. And so now we move to forgetting someone in a car. In this example, we have many examples in which dogs are forgotten in cars. And so here we have in a short period of time, 4 police dogs died in a matter of 5 weeks. And she explicitly had stated the officer mistakenly left the sleeping dog in a hot car. And so what's happening is these officers are typically driving without the dog in the car. And so the officer has lost awareness that the sleeping dog was in the backseat of the car. The dog remains in the car after the officer leaves, and the dog dies of heat stroke. And over about a decade ago, the Association for Psychological Science highlighted the importance of prospective memory failures, how they can lead to tragedy. And they, in fact, specifically stated that in the summer, infants die in hot cars as a result of a prospective memory failure, that is, forgetting the child that is sleeping quietly in the back seat. So scientists have been addressing this issue now for at least a decade, and I've been studying it now for 15 years. So when you look at this picture, it gives you an idea of this recipe for a disaster. And in this example, what I'd like you to think about is you have a situation in which the mother is normally driving straight from home to work. The father normally brings the child to daycare. But on this day, the father is unavailable, so the mother says, sure, I'll drop off the baby on the way to daycare. But what happens is her habit brain memory system, the basal ganglia, can take over, and it can actually suppress our declarative, more conscious memory system. So as she's driving, the habit memory system takes over, and she loses awareness of the child in the car. So this is essentially the recipe for disaster. This is what leads ultimately to children being forgotten in the car. The consistent pattern is the driver has a habit, goes into autopilot system, and loses awareness of the child in the car. And I like to visualize this a bit using this train track illustration. So you have the parent that normally drives from home to work along this track. And then on one day, now the parent is saying to herself or himself, okay, along my drive, I need to stop the drive, take my child to daycare, and then continue on with the drive. So you need to suppress your habit, which is to drive straight home to work, and stop that habit, go to daycare, and then get back onto the track. But what happens during the drive is that awareness that you need to stop the habit is lost. And that slowly fades from your mind, and you drive straight from home to work. Now, what happens is the brain perceives this as a normal day following your habit. And so you're therefore driving from home to work. And what is so important is when the driver arrives at the destination, the driver has completely lost awareness that the child is in the car. The driver then exits the car, can go to work, and now, in fact, you have this false memory that if you were to ask the driver, where is your child? The driver would say, my child is at daycare. And so this is part of the strangeness of brain functioning. The brain seems to create this false memory that allows the parent or caretaker to actually think that the child is at daycare, when in fact the child is still in the car. This is a surprisingly common phenomenon that in a survey reported at the National Lifesavers Conference, report was that about 25% of parents of young children reported at some time during a drive, they had forgotten that their child was in the car with them. So we're potentially talking about millions of parents forgetting that their child is in the car. So why is it that millions of children are not forgotten in cars? Well, we could think about this as layers of protection, in which you start with the possibility that millions of children can be left in a car. And so it's like that arrow now is going through different layers of protection. And the only way you get ultimately to tragedy is if it passes through all these layers of protection, like holes in different layers of Swiss cheese, without being interrupted. If it hits any one of these layers of protection, then the child doesn't die of heat stroke. So you have susceptibility factors, such as parents being sleep deprived, chronically and acutely stressed, that will increase the likelihood they will have this motor memory pattern, which causes them to lose awareness of the child. You have a quiet child. It's consistent that you have a sleeping or quiet child in the car. And there is no cue explicitly to show the parent, the driver, that the child is in the back seat. You then have, it's a particular kind of drive in which the person has a habit memory. The person is on a drive that will take them from point A to B without the child. And so in that case, then the habit memory, brain memory system takes over. And then even if the child is left in a car, it may not be warm enough then for the car to be a heat stroke, as well as the time factor. So it is only in a sense when everything goes wrong. And so this trajectory can go all the way through to the end, from the possibility of tragedy to tragedy actually happening. Everything ultimately has to go wrong for that to happen. And I want to elaborate a little bit on how it is that stress can produce this kind of effect in which you lose awareness of your child. Because I have studied how we're under pressure, how stress affects people. So I was funded by the VA for 30 years to study stress in the brain. And so there's something very important to understand. It's called weapon focus. So when someone feels stress, in particular, if your life is threatened, but this works for stress in general, that our brain becomes very focused on what is causing us to be stressed. And there have been many times I've talked to parents who have forgotten children in cars, and they'll say something terribly stressful was happening during the drive. And so when you are stressed, you have what's called weapon focus. Your brain focuses on the trigger cue that is causing you to be stressed. And when that happens, you lose awareness of everything else around you. And part of that problem of losing awareness of what's around you is your attention and your memory process shifts away from the child in the back seat, now focusing on whatever it is that's causing you to be stressed. And that's terribly relevant to just one. They're all tragedies when children die in cars, but this is one that's personal for me. In this case, you have a mother and a daughter who operated a daycare center in New Mexico, and they had been at a park with the children, and they were driving back to the daycare center, to Sandy and Mary Taylor. And in Sandy's car, it was terribly stressful because one of the children had soiled her clothes. And it was so hard for Sandy because the other children were teasing her and taunting her. And so she wanted to get that child back and clean up her clothes. And she was focused on helping that child that had her clothes soiled. And so she had this weapon focus kind of experience. And so when she arrived at the destination, she lost awareness of the two children that were in car seats. And she brought that child that had soiled clothes into the daycare center, losing awareness of the other two children. They were left in the car heated up. One child died and the other developed brain damage. And Sandy and Mary now are in prison for decades. They were found guilty of reckless child abuse, and they will be in prison for decades. This is part of the tragedy we have, in which brain function, which is really magnificent in general, but in this case went awry. And that is why I emphasized, what do we really need? We must have technology. In the same way that an airline pilot cannot be depended on to use his or her memory to set the flaps properly, we must have technology to override a failure of our cognitive processing in our brain, which is so vulnerable when we're driving in cars. So it does lead to why I think the look before you lock is not only ineffective, I think it's counterproductive. So understand the scenarios, and I've seen so many different scenarios and they follow basic patterns. Consider the parent that always drives straight to work without the child, and they hear about look before you lock. Well, why would a parent look before you lock when you know your child is in the car, because you never drive the child to daycare, you're always driving straight to work. So you wouldn't have that habit. Consider the second scenario. I've had parents who never drive on certain days and always drive on other days. So consider that the parent that takes a child on Monday through Wednesday, the parent always knows that he or she has the child in the car. So they don't need to look before they lock. And on Thursday and Friday, They know they never have the child. So these are people who would say, I'm not going to look before I lock because I know whether or not my child is in the car. The times when parents and caretakers have forgotten children in cars, if you ask them right at the moment they are leaving the car, they will universally say, I'm absolutely certain my child is not in the car. And that is because of two things. They have lost awareness that the child is in the car, and they've created this artificial false memory that the child must be at daycare. And so that is why the look before you lock to me won't work. And it's even counterproductive because the parent that leaves a child in a car and the child dies, when they hear about look before you lock, and you say to them, well, why didn't you look in the car before you lock? That to me will just add to their misery. And so again, for the parent that drives hundreds of times and never has the child in the back seat, look before you lock is a habit that frankly doesn't make sense. I know it sounds intuitive. If you would just look in the back seat, then you wouldn't forget your child. But from a scientific perspective, I would suggest that it's not something people would do, and it's potentially counterproductive. What we need is something to tell the driver that the child is in the car today, for the same reason that I would put a note on my steering wheel that says, pick up milk at the store today, because this is a day in which I need to stop my habit memory. And while I'm driving home, I see that cue, which tells me, stop the habit memory, go to the store, and then continue on with your drive. So it needs to be a cue, a child-specific cue that says my child is in the car today. So what I've advocated, and I have seen others advocate for this, is it's so important. If you haven't got the technology, then I think people should be educated to know, first of all, this can happen to anyone. And once you accept that, which unfortunately is only a minority of people who actually believe that, but once you accept that, then it is so important to have a cue. And so one example would be have something in the car seat that's there when the child is not in the car seat. When you place the child in the car seat, move that to the front, which is now a reminder that your child today is in the car seat. I think that would be far more effective in the absence of technology than asking people to always look in the back seat, even if your child is not there. So summarize a couple aspects. I think it's so important to educate the public as well as law enforcement about how readily this occurs, how it can occur to anyone. And I think it's important for law enforcement to understand that this act occurs without intention and without awareness, which ultimately gets into the legal issues that technically, while this is a tragedy, it's not a crime. Understand that we have competition between our different brain areas. The basal ganglia is a powerful habit-based memory system we've all experienced, in which we have a plan to do something and then we forget to do it. And most of the time, that's a relatively benign memory failure, forgetting to stop at the store on the way home. But sometimes that can be catastrophic. And that the prospective memory, which is remember to do something in the future, is extremely fragile. And so that ability that we assume will work, it's almost as if we would like to have this beacon going off right in the corner of our eye that says, child in car. Don't forget the child in the car. But we don't have that. And so we need to understand how fragile that prospective memory system is and how it can be overridden by our habit-based memory system. Again, that's emphasizing prospective memory is so susceptible to distraction, to stress, and to sleep deprivation, three factors which are experienced routinely by parents of young children. And so finally, then, I want to emphasize that when that habit-based memory system is engaged, the person loses awareness of the original plan. And that's what has tragic consequences. It can be a fire in the kitchen because you've lost awareness of leaving the range on. It could be leaving a gun in a bathroom because you're momentarily distracted. And of course, it means forgetting. And that, unfortunately, it doesn't sound like it's a strong enough word. We would like to have something better than just saying forgetting. How do you just forget a child in a car? But that is the word that describes it scientifically. We need to be aware that memory impairments can occur without our awareness. We lose awareness of the child in the car. And it's so important to appreciate that when the person exits the car, they have completely lost awareness that the child is in the car. And that is why it is so incredibly important to have technology. Realize we have technology that tells us to shut off our headlights. We have technology to be able to find our keys. We absolutely must have technology to be able to tell us that a child has been left in a car after we've exited. I thank you for allowing me to have the time to share what I've learned about this with you folks.
Dr. Diamond, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for the compassionate way that you have shared this information and given a thought to those parents. This is a really hard topic to listen to, and I'm sure it's a hard topic to research and to have on your mind. So thank you for sharing. And I'm going to ask you maybe at the end of the presentation to go back to the slide where you had the teddy bear. You had a note on there. I wanted to ask you, what did it say? I was making a whole bunch of notes. I'm like, oh, this is some really inspiring words on solutions and suggestions about what we can do.
The note makes it even more explicit. It says, remember the baby.
Okay. Thank you. I was just writing too fast and trying to pay attention, but thank you. As a reminder for everyone, we will have a question and answer session at the end, and we can come back to get your questions answered. So again, Dr. Diamond, thank you. Our second speaker today is Mike Ezzell. I'm sorry, I didn't practice beforehand. I apologize. Mike is a program manager in the Roadway Mobility Safety Practice and works with Our Driving Concern, Texas Employer Traffic Safety Program, a program of the National Safety Council in cooperation with the Texas Department of Transportation. He holds a master's degree in education from Abilene Christian University. He has more than 40 years of experience as a public speaker, educator, and safety professional. Mike will share how Our Driving Concern partners with the employers in the state of Texas in providing heat stroke educational resources. Thank you.
I thank you for the opportunity to participate today in this. The thing is, and as Dr. Diamond has pointed out, this whole matter of awareness and distraction as an issue that is there, and for us, as a grant program with the National Safety Council and the Texas Department of Transportation, we have have an employer focus program that has been initiated working with employers, and in fact our program is the only one in the country that is funded, that is geared towards employers and seeking to address a number of major concerns that are there as far as motor vehicle fatalities are concerned. In fact, the 5 riskiest behaviors is our focus: distraction, impairment, aggressive driving, fatigue, and passenger restraint. And going back to some of the comments in Dr. Diamond's presentation, some of these very elements are what fit into the issue that we're talking about. And with Our Driving Concern program, we've obviously have adjusted our focus as we have gone through this process, and as we have had the grant, and this year actually have an additional grant that is focused on pedestrian safety. And when we look at transportation, leading cause of occupational fatalities, and the roadway is an extension of the workplace. And when we look at Centers for Disease Control statistics, leading cause of death for children between the ages of 1 and 14 is unintentional injuries, and employers play a key role in seeking to address these various things that are there. And definitely employers need to be mindful of the issues. And as I'll show here in just a moment, it's an area that we were unaware of, and has helped us to try to shift our focus to look at this issue as it relates to the pediatric heat stroke deaths that are taking place in this country. And in our program, looking at employers, a wide variety of industries that are represented, from municipalities to private companies, to various sectors of the workplace. And it's through the efforts that are there that we can make a difference. And in talking with employers, not only on these subjects, and as we look at this, even this issue of the heat stroke deaths with the children in the cars, it's one of those things that if you were to look at the headlines, most people would say, "Oh, that's a problem here or there," and really don't consider the workplace as an area where this might be an issue. And so as we look at this, kind of want to step back a little bit to the National Safety Council's call to action in 2018, where various areas were looked at and were addressed. Lawmakers, for example, and the things that they can do, parents and caregivers. But the other aspect of it is the public aspect, and taking action immediately when you see an unattended child in a vehicle. And I've got to share a personal incident here. I'm a first aid instructor with National Safety Council, and I carry my mannequins in my car. And on an occasion, I was parked somewhere, and as I was approaching my car, I noticed a couple looking very intently at my car. And as I got there, he finally said, we weren't sure whether there was a child in there. All we could see was this head, and we were about to do something. And I appreciated the fact. Told them I appreciated the fact that they were attentive and that they were paying attention to this because of the issue that is there. And truly, it is the public that should be the ambassadors for this. And when we look at the workplace, some might say, well, what does the workplace have to do with this? Because if you were to look at the headlines and the stories that are there, so often they relate to someplace other than the workplace. And so the Texas Traffic Institute did a survey of Texans to see what their level of awareness was, how knowledgeable they were as far as the various topics and the areas of concern that are out there that we need to focus on. And most people were aware. In fact, a very high percentage were aware that it was illegal to leave a child, to knowingly leave a child unattended in a vehicle. But more than half of them did not realize how quickly the interior of a car can heat up. Today it's 80 degrees here in Houston, Texas, where I am. And a car out in the sun in a parking lot, for example, would heat up very quickly in this particular situation to an environment that truly would be life-threatening. But the other aspect of it too is that a fourth of the children who died gained access to a vehicle unnoticed, and so not even being aware. I mentioned a moment ago, as far as the workplace is concerned, and this is from research of Jan Null, and would draw your attention to the work area. 23% of pediatric vehicular heat stroke deaths from 1998 through 2021 were in the workplace, in employer parking lots. And if you were to ask most employers, and this is not being critical of employers, it's a lack of awareness on their part, and is one of those areas where, as a grant, we are trying to address as far as the state of Texas is concerned, but that they don't look at their parking lot as anything other than a place where employees park their vehicles, not thinking about the other issues that can be associated with that area of the workplace. And as you see in the lower right-hand corner, in that time period, 1998 to 2021, 210 deaths were there, occurred there at the workplace. Many of those, in that part, they were in that parked car in the parking lot of that employer. And so, as we look at this type of information and this, what the facts are telling us, it's an area that we have, as far as our Texas program is concerned, have kind of gone back to the drawing board and see what are some things that we can do to inform, educate the employer base that we have as far as this particular problem is concerned. And one of the items that we developed this past year was what we call a parking lot toolkit, which I believe there is a link to this on the cpsboard.org /heat strokes site, and trying to raise the awareness. And in that toolkit, a number of things that are there that we have put in place. Over on the right-hand side, you see some cards that say distraction and pedestrians. And these are, we call these safety coach cards that we encourage employers to use in having discussions with their employees, and have added this set focusing on this issue to try and raise awareness. We publish a traffic tabloid every month and have dedicated some of those to that particular topic, provided an awareness tool that actually has a chart that shows the elapsed time, what the outside temperature was. And for example, I said it's 80 degrees here. Well, in 20 minutes, my car closed, or even with a cracked window, in 20 minutes could be 109 degrees. And so trying to raise the awareness of our employees in that particular regard is one of the tools that we have, and we continue to see if there are others that other things that we can do as well with this particular topic. But what we're trying to do is to bring in the employers into the discussion, raising the awareness with their employees, and realizing that it is something that needs to be paid attention to, and trying to take a proactive approach, because you certainly don't want to be in the situation where this happens in that employee parking lot, and then dealing with the press in that particular regard. And in our particular group of folks that utilize the resources that we have a lot of folks who can be those eyes, who can be that person to be responsive and to react in a situation where they see an infant in harm's way, because we have delivery drivers, there's professional drivers, municipalities, the various areas. And so one of those things that we try to bring to their attention and raise their awareness of this, so that if they see something, that they would indeed know how to react in that particular situation, to take the action that needs to be taken to save the life of someone. And it's like the pieces of a puzzle. And when all the pieces go together, we get the complete picture. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Diamond that it's more than a card. There are some things that can be done, and that he mentioned in his presentation. Putting your briefcase in the back seat, because you have to go back there to get that at the workplace, or something that's going to be important whenever you get to where you're going to, again, to raise that awareness. But we did develop the card and have that as far as the look before you lock situation. Also impressing the importance, even in your neighborhood, in your car in the driveway. Yeah, we've spent a lot of time focused on, well, you want to keep your car locked so nobody will steal it. Well, you also want to keep your car locked because you have inquisitive children who, when playing their games, will think this is a perfect place to hide, and then get into a very serious situation, even a life-threatening situation that is there that could indeed take their life. And so, with our program, we are very social from a standpoint of we are on Facebook, we're Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, a lot of different things, and a lot of resources that are out there for employers, for the public, for anyone that they can download. Posters, there's webinars, just a number of things that we can do. But it's going to take the effort of all of us to be able to make an impact and to make a difference as far as this issue is concerned. Again, appreciate the opportunity of sharing what we're doing here as far as the state of Texas is concerned, and would be happy to answer any questions that you might have at the end.
Mike, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for all that you shared with us. Working really hard, and I keep going back to that statement you made about 19 degrees in 10 minutes, and oh my gosh, when we all walk outside, we're like, oh, it's hot and it's getting hotter, but that is a really, really quick increase, something that we can remember. So thank you again. We'll do some questions at the end. Our third speaker today is Johnny Humphreys. Johnny served as a child passenger safety instructor for 15 years, traveling throughout Texas, conducting CPS certification workshops and training child seat distribution programs for the State Health Services Safe Riders. Upon his retirement, he helped develop the Texas Heatstroke Task Force, and since 2011 has served as its chair. Johnny will give us a look at how heatstroke is featured in the Texas Highway Safety Plan.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am going to go through the Texas Heatstroke Task Force and concentrate really on what we as a group have been doing since 2011 when we began. It actually began as the result of a multi-day meeting that was moderated by Safe Kids. Jan Knoll with No Heatstroke was there and some other people. And it was for 3 states. It was for Arizona, Florida, and Texas. And each state would have these sessions throughout where we would gather together. It was traffic safety professionals who would gather together for their respective states to develop a plan. And so this was the plan that Texas came up with. And that was to develop a statewide network of safety professionals who provide PVH, Pediatric, Vehicular, Heatstroke, death prevention, education along with their regular duties, along with their other duties. Next, please. And this means that the THTF members really includes a lot of people in a lot of different professions. Basically, anyone that's doing community education can do this. They do not have to be child passenger safety or CPS technicians, but we do have a lot of CPS technicians that are part of the task force. As of this month, there's nearly 500 members located in 120 cities throughout Texas. And again, this is not all they do. Certainly, they all have other jobs and other job duties. The way I sometimes consider it, it's like, Batman's utility belt. He's got this utility that he can pull out of his belt when he's doing education to include this, to help, to include this. So because another part of what we came up with as a team when we envisioned this was that a lot of people who each did a little bit could make a big difference. Funding, when it began, we did receive some funding from Safe Kids Worldwide, actually, for the first 5 years. What they did was that they provided some funding for some travel expenses, and as well as some contracting expenses for me. And then for 2 years, it operated just as a complete unfunded volunteer thing. And then I established the task force as a nonprofit organization through IRS, and that enabled me to apply for a state grant. And although it wasn't eligible for Highway 402 money, the Department of Transportation was able to sponsor it through a state grant. So we are funded through a state grant, although we still meet all of the, we're on the same schedule as all the 402 funding grants. And frankly, we have the smallest grant of all of them in traffic safety in Texas, but that's fine. It's enough for us to do what we need to do. Next slide, please. I just want to show you some of the different activities that we have. We do have some printed materials. We printed up these really nice pan fans. I love how it matches up with what we do with heat. And it contains our educational message in English and Spanish. And of course, a lot of our members distribute these throughout their events that they do. The graphic in the middle is actually from a Facebook post, and a lot of our members use social media. In this case, Austin EMS had done a television interview, and then they posted the interview online, which actually I just did yesterday. I did the same thing, and so that's a nice way to get extra mileage out of your event. And then over on the right is some child passenger safety technicians at an event checking seats, and they set up their heat display, or they borrowed one from us or from another group. There's quite a few of these in Texas, these heat displays, and they also included the heat stroke information along with the child seat checkup, which is extremely appropriate. Next slide, please. In Texas, since 2014, the Department of Transportation has included in their dynamic messaging signs system. It's called DMS. So they have a DMS mini campaign every summer, usually in July. And the campaign will go anywhere from 5 days to 10 to maybe even 2 weeks long. And unless it's preempted by some emergency traffic information or by something like a Amber Alert, that's the message that folks will see. And of course, the dynamic means that there's 2 messages that flash. In our case, it's never leave a child or pet alone in a car. If a child or pet is alone in the car, get help. This is good for creating awareness. And I think awareness is high in Texas as a result of this going on now for this will be the 8th year that they've been doing this. And on the right, just to let you know what that is when this is going on, one can go to the TxDOT website and look up any district. There's several districts, 12 districts in Texas, I think, and look up what's exactly showing on each sign in that district. And so it's just a nice thing, a nice feature there. Next slide, please. Starting at the top left, we do award the Badge of Courage when we find out about them to persons who call 911 to report an unattended child in a car, or for law enforcement or first responders who enter a car to rescue a child from a hot car. And we like to award these things in a public venue. And in the case of the photo on the upper left, that was at a Houston City Council meeting. And the Safe Kids coordinator there in Houston also had the city issue a proclamation about heat stroke prevention for that week, as well as honoring the Badge of Courage recipient. Over on the right, it's a newsletter from the Laredo District of TxDOT, and they had a nice front page story about heat stroke prevention and what they've been doing in that district about it. On the bottom, to the left, that says Kyle Fire. We try to include Spanish-speaking news media and venues whenever possible. This is an interview done with Univision in Spanish with the Kyle Fire Department. Next slide, please. This is, I know it looks, there's a lot of letters here. I don't expect you or want you to even try to read all of that. But what it is I was just trying to show that this is the monthly update that is sent to all members. And the update contains information, news about heat stroke, and in Texas specifically, but also nationally, and things within Texas that have happened that they need to know about. And then it always includes resources as well. On the resources, we'll always print the prevention message in English and Spanish, and then resources we use we suggest going to the Child Passenger Safety Board's heat stroke resource page, where you can tab through all of the national resources there. NoHeatstroke.org, Kids in Cars, NHTSA, they're all there. And then also we do highlight Dr. David's paper that he spoke of in his meeting with in his session earlier. Next slide, please. And then also we include the activity log. So we keep an activity log. This is actually 2 pages. It's a spreadsheet that just continually runs for the entire grant year, usually the way we do it. And as members do stuff, they'll send them in to me, and we'll post them on this activity log. And then it will include a lot of links to news media that they do and things like that, social media posts. I wanted to point out the story. Actually, it's the first photo that you might see up where you can see it's a man wearing a badge. That actually was a news story for another Badge of Courage that was awarded. This was just a little bit over a year ago now, to a Duncanville police officer who rescued a child from a hot vehicle. And what was so nice about this story was that the officer and his police department shared his body cam with the news agency. And then so they were able to show on the story the entire rescue, breaking the window, getting the child out. You could see that the child had thrown up on itself. The child was distressed, and he was talking to it sweetly and getting it into shade. It was just a wonderful story. And that story actually, I noticed, really made national news, and in fact international. I read it in one of the I read some British media. It was either the UK Daily Mail or the BBC, I don't remember, but one of them carried the story. So it was really nice to see that. And that's what can happen if you just again, finding out about these things is the real trick. And often if Jan Knoll will sometimes send that out as well as the death information. Next page, please. This is our contact information, and the picture you see there is a RJ who died in actually it was in 2018, and he was 3 years old, and his mother is part of the heat stroke task force. So it's for children like him, of course, that we're doing this. But also, as David pointed out, it's really a tragedy for the entire family. It's a tragedy for the survivors of such an incident. It's a tragedy for the caregiver that was responsible. So it affects so many people, and doing this now for 11 years, you get to meet some of these families and all, and we really don't want it to happen. So that's behind all of our efforts that we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for giving so much of your own time to follow through and help us all. You have some really amazing things in your tool set, and I'm so excited to dig in and find those to share. We do have about 4 minutes for questions. I think we've all been so deeply involved in the presentation. I don't think we've had a chance to kind of list them yet, but does anyone that's joining us today have questions, or do you need a website to access some of these free materials so you can implement them in your state? Well, I want to say that I have been touched and deeply motivated to find ways to implement this through my own CPS program here in Alaska. We've been incredibly fortunate, but I think it would be wise to take action now and see what we could do in our state. Do any of our speakers have any last, thank you, Mike, for your website. Do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with us before we end?
Well, I just want to also thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this information with you. And I think our other speakers really were as passionate as I was, and I really appreciate their perspective. And I just think one of the most important messages is to get across to people that this truly can happen to anyone. And I think the educational part is this doesn't happen to bad parents. This happens to anyone. And that's so incredibly important. And also just want to emphasize, I understand the appeal of look before you lock. It just sounds so obvious. If you would just look in the back seat before you lock the car, children wouldn't die in hot cars. And I just think it's counterproductive. It's not constructive, and I would prefer that people not use the look before lock, because it almost makes it appear as if, well, you screwed up. You didn't even look in the back seat before you locked your child away. So I see this now pretty often, and I understand the appeal, but I would prefer that people not use it.
Thank you. I hope that you saw Denise Donaldson's comments. She said, thanks to all three presenters, great information. A key issue that, as Dr. Diamond said, the vast minority of people don't believe the root cause could be normal memory failure.
Oh, if we have time, just one more thing I'll add.
Yeah.
I'm also working with a group that is looking at children forgotten on school buses. Children actually die when they're left on buses. And you would think that should never happen because the bus driver is supposed to walk through the bus, and there's also technology. But sometimes the child escapes the awareness, the attention of the bus driver, even if he or she walks through the bus. So that's also something to keep in mind, that children are dying of heat stroke when they're left on a school bus.
Oh, Denise wanted to point out that I probably read that backwards. I probably should have said majority instead of minority. And Dr. Diamond, that's important. There is a revision happening to the school bus curriculum, and maybe that topic is something to be considered, if it can be included with part of that educational series.
Great.
Well, thank you all again for being here. we look forward to next month. I don't have the date handy, but before we talk about that, we can talk about the upcoming webinar series. Be sure you register for each of these really exciting webinars. We've done a lot of work to make sure that we've got some great content for you, and so that you can earn your CEUs for recertification. The upcoming CPS coordinators, oh goodness, coordinator forums. It's early in Alaska, it's early. Engaging and mentoring independent, non-affiliated technicians, building healthcare provider awareness of child passenger safety, and Child Passenger Safety Planning Week. Remember that this CPS coordinators forum is for you. If there are topics that you would like to discuss or that are important in your area, we would like to hear about it. If you have a speaker that you would like to have present to the group, please let us know. We would really like to build on that information. And I think the next slide has the email address that you can use to suggest. Oh, that's actually where the webinar recording will be. And you can email those suggestions to secretariat@NSC. Okay, I'm really struggling today. I apologize. Somebody will put that email
I'm
address
putting it into the chat, and
Yes.
it's secretariat@cpsboard.org.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I'm a little flustered. Thank you all for being here. Jessica, if you'll go ahead and end the recording. A few of us will stick around for a couple extra minutes. If you have any questions, we'll be here. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your email, Mike. Denise, thank you for your clarification. I'm sorry, I'm